it is great to be sitting with you.
How lovely to see you again.
Well, season 3 of The Gilded Age has just arrived. Let's hear it again. The Gilded Age, my favorite TV series. It's been a year and a half since the season 2 finale. How exciting was it returning to film it?
On so many levels, it was exciting. It's exciting to be in anything that Julian Fellowes is writing and involved in because he's, such a high caliber artist. And then it's exciting to just revisit the world of the Gilded Age, which is a wonderful escape from this kind of crazy life we're living in now. But also, it's a wonderful return to the cast and crew. We love each other. The show is just a repertory company of, a revolving door on Broadway, off-Broadway talent. We all have known each other for years or worked together, or done readings together, or seen each other's work. And it really just feels like a family, a company of theater actors, and our crew is wonderful. So there's this feeling of communality, and it's a reason that I think most of us, probably all of us, want to return for a 4th season, just to return to that world that is safe and creative and full of, just people working at the top of their game.
It's such a beautiful world. You look at the Gilded Age, you look at the sets, the costumes, everything about this show. And then, of course, you mentioned Julian Fellowes. So what's it like just being on the set of the world that you live in? Well,
all of the actors felt the same way, which is in season 1, we were really just trying to get used to living in that world, and certainly the women wearing, these very tight corsets and having to sit a certain way, and we were given really lessons on etiquette and how to speak. We had a dialect coach, even though we speak American, it's a different kind, it's an old world or just from another century. People definitely spoke in a different way from our casual way of communicating. So there's a formality. We had to get used to that. We even had to be instructed how to hold our knives and forks and our teacups, and you never have you never put a teaspoon on the tablecloth. Of course not. And the teaspoon has to be in front of the cup, not on the side of the cup. And you never take the cup on its own. You always take the saucer and the cup. So it was all of these marvelous details entering this world that required a language, a language. But you see, I had trained at Juilliard, and we would wear long skirts every day. We were assigned a long skirt. Mine was green. And we wore long skirts to get used to the fact that in period plays, you wear a costume. Instead of going to class in jeans or casual sweats, we had skirts on, and a skirt already gives you a different body sense. But there was a lot of training, speech, voice, and because we did all of those classical plays, we did Shakespeare, Moliere, we did Jacobean plays, Shaw. I was used to doing period work, but I'd never done a period piece on film. My theater career has tons of, plays that were written in other centuries and required that skill set that I learned at Juilliard, but I didn't ever use that skill set on film. I did, I've done great stuff on film, funny stuff mostly, but never something that required the Downton Abbey kind of thing. And so for me, it was just a wonderful opportunity. In fact, when I begged for them to let me cross over and do 2 shows for 2 different networks, because they didn't want to let me go. CBS didn't want to let me go to work for another, because I would be a lead in 2 shows, and that was sort of not allowed. But I actually wrote to him and said, look, I have worked my whole career. I'm at a point in my career where to do this role and to use these skills means so much to me. And well, anyway, the rest is history, because I am, I'm still doing the role, but I love it for that reason. I love that it calls upon. That's why so many theater actors are cast, because we're not afraid of period. We're not afraid of language. We're not. If we are afraid of it. We get past it by using our skill set.
You mentioned you used some of your skill set from Juilliard.
Yes,
obviously
absolutely.
with this character, but like you said, she had to learn all these other things. It's not only learning dialogue and creating a character, but it's all the other things you have to do, the etiquette things, like you said. Now Agnes picks up, the tea.
Absolutely, and most of the life of the characters of Agnes and Ada happens in our townhouse. So little things matter. Those little details matter, and they tried to give Cynthia, and they still try and give Cynthia this King Charles Spaniel because Julian really wants her. He really wanted her to always have this dog, but the dog proved to be a challenge. A challenge added maybe an hour onto our day, as the dog wouldn't, But she has the dog, and she does needlepoint. But I'm always asking props for a book or a newspaper. Mind you, the print on these books and newspapers is so tiny that I don't know how anybody read, but they're actual period books and period newspapers. But it matters, this sort of behavior, and it helps you as an actor to. You can't just sit there in a big dress and say your lines. It helps to have things to do as an actor, and it also puts you in the scene much more.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about the incredible character. They're all so beautifully written on this show, and Agnes specifically. How wonderful is she to play?
Oh, she's wonderful. she's Julian Fellows. She's his sense of humor, his point of view, I think. I mean, I'm not saying he's an insufferable snob. No. No, I don't mean that.
Yeah.
But he has a sense of how things should be. Yeah. And he speaks rather succinctly. And Agnes, one of the things I've learned is to just trust that you can make your point and then never apologize for it. You can speak in a declarative sentence, say, I really don't like that suit. And not apologize. You just say, she says what she means, and she means what she says. By the way, I do like that suit. But, she's, and her wit is she's so bright and so sharp that when anybody compliments me on my ability to deliver these one-liners, I just say, it's Julian. I'm just the delivery system. And the simpler and more direct I am when I say things, put a period at the end of that sentence, it's fine. It works. It's funny.
Because what I love it, like you said, season 1, they were just presenting all the characters.
Yeah, it was a huge introduction. I say this season 1 was so much exposition, mainly delivered by me. You've got to. I had paragraphs that when Marion came in and I was directing her and where we were going to go to church and she has to get her, clothes done and this is right and you can't do this and you can't do that and this is the proper thing. And it was just, an anthem of how the old society behaves. And I thought, okay, I know that this is exposition, but I'm just going to, do it. But, Agnes was instructing her niece, so it wasn't just pure exposition. It was, informative. But it did make me laugh because most Americans are not familiar with the Gilded Age, and that the Gilded Age happened right after the Civil War, and it happened because the North made so much money, was so enriched because of the war, that there was all this money, and they even started spending that money during the Civil War. Yeah. It was great economically for the North, as horrifying as that war was. But after the war, the Gilded Age began in earnest, and it was the beginning of American capitalism, which we're still living through.
What do you love the most about her? Because we've seen so many different sides of her between season 1 and 2 and 3. I fell madly in love with her character when what you did for Ada for the wedding. It just broke my heart. I was like, my God, she has a heart. You know what I mean? It's like, so what have you loved the most about how well she's written and how she's changed and evolved?
The wonderful thing about playing a character who has that level of certitude and authority, and her assumption that she's got a certain place in the world, in her family. Yeah. And she's a tough cookie. You know, that's a character that Julian particularly loves, is those tough old broads who actually, you know, they got us through. Those women actually are the movers and shakers of that era. But I did a lot of work on her backstory, and I won't go into it, but she went through a lot, and she married because to rescue not only herself but her sister. Women married to be rescued, because otherwise you just fall away. She married a man who was, I think, rather cold. And at one point, Ada does say, you wouldn't want to be alone in a room with him, implying maybe he was a dangerous man, or intimidating, or maybe even, who knows. But the fact, what I'm trying to say is Agnes made a lot of sacrifices and had to live a life of, you know, just being tough. She had to rely on her strength, and then she invited her sister to live with her, and she's a survivor. She's a survivor, and so she's tough. She is strong, and I honestly base this character personally on my mom. My mom grew up in the Depression in Buffalo. She walked to school in the middle of winter in Buffalo, New York, with newspapers stuffed in her shoes. She married right after, she married, and then my father had to go off. No, she didn't marry. He went off to war, and then they got married. And 8 years later, he dropped dead of an aneurysm, and so she had to raise 2 children on her own, and she didn't even know how to drive. And she worked for, I don't know, maybe 20 years at an air conditioning factory, because she was a draftswoman during the war, and she ordered air conditioning parts, and that's how she supported my brother and I. Money was always an issue, but my mother would come home from work, always in a bad mood, open the cupboard, reach for the Seagram's 7 Crown, pour herself a stiff drink, and then we'd have dinner. And she was tough. She was a tough cookie. She lived through a lot. And then she retired at the age of 70, and a couple years later got hit with the first of 3 different cancers. She got lymphoma, lung cancer, breast cancer, and when it kept going into remission, lived till she was 85. But the doctors even thought she was something of a medical miracle, because she was so strong. So back to Agnes. I know this woman. I lived with this woman. I know that, you know, but when you say, the nice thing about playing someone that strong and that tough and that certain, like she was convinced that Ada should not marry. Yeah. She had no skill to be a wife. She didn't know what that was. And, you know, Agnes did not want to lose her sister either. It was selfish. But until the very end, I mean, Ada leaves for the church, and Agnes is still, she's not going to go. And her own butler says, you're going to regret this. And then she shows up. And then you see, I talk about it and I can't help but get emotional. I told Cynthia that the costume I was going to wear has remained one of my favorite costumes. It was very original for Agnes, but it was really chic. And I said to Cynthia, between us as actresses, I want you to know that Agnes is saving this dress for a very special event. So when we played the scene and I walked down the aisle, she and I looked at each other, and there was that moment of, you know, I'm here for you. And then just that look of love. There's so much love there. But it pays off so when you play a character who doesn't show that emotion, who almost never shows that emotion. Suddenly you see the depth. That's more fun than if you're, you know, your heart is on your sleeve all the time. I just think playing a character that's that restrained. And of course, in season 3, you're going to see a reversal of the roles. So it's wonderful to see this woman who was always in charge, always the boss. be toppled off the throne. And, it's a story as old as literature, the toppling of the king and the humiliation of the arrogant person. It makes for great comedy. So season 3 is really a lot of fun between Cynthia and I.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Cynthia. I mean, you two have known each other and worked together before.
I love Cynthia.
Yeah.
I love her. She's a great human being and a marvelous professional and a marvelous actress. And for those of you who don't know, I played her mother in 1984. It was an enormous Broadway hit, written by Tom Stoppard, directed by the great Mike Nichols, with Jeremy Irons and Glenn Close, and we all won Tony Awards. Cynthia was still in Barnard College. She was and I had just married, and during the run, I got pregnant. So Cynthia and I would sit backstage, and I remember this teenager, Cynthia Nixon. She always loved to listen to the, is the baby going to kick? Is the baby? And we shared that as people and as actresses. So years later, I get a call. I think I was in the garage doing the recycling when I get a call from Cynthia Nixon. I happen to have my phone. She says, Christine, is this true that you're being offered this role? Because if you're... And I said, yeah, they're trying to work it out. And she said, oh my God. And so we got very excited. We were, I think, the two people maybe cast first in it. But now we're playing sisters. So we just had a head start on our relationship. And it wasn't, actors are so wonderful. When you know somebody as a human being, it makes it so much easier to look into his or her eyes and say, and you can be grouchy, you can be. I knew I could punch her, and I could give it to her, and she knew I was only acting. Whereas poor Louisa Jacobson, she was terrified of me. But I stay in character between takes. It's not like I'm nasty to everybody between takes. But I don't suddenly get all ooey gooey in between takes because I'm Agnes. So poor Louisa just like, she's so scared. But we're fine.
No, because there's something about watching you and Cynthia together. I knew your history, but it's so great when you see two performers together who can do anything together in a scene. What's it like? How long does it take to film like this? I talked to a lot of actors and actresses who this season, like Audra McDonald is doing Gypsy, so I think everything was scattered around, and Carrie Coon was doing The White Lotus. So
dear Carrie came straight from Thailand, and I think she had maybe 48 hours to unpack and brush her teeth and say hi to her kids, and then she was Bertha Russell, and of course we've got the great Audra doing Mama Rose, and also having to show up to play a ballroom scene. Actors are, I think we're made of either Teflon or I don't know what we're made out of, but it's amazing, the stamina. And, I did, when I was doing Good Wife, I did Into the Woods, and I flew back and forth. And sometimes I would arrive at the airport and go straight to set. And I remember saying to my first AD, God, that jet lag, and wow, this is really challenging because that, 5-hour difference. And he looked at me and he said, that's what you call a champagne problem. So I have never forgotten that. These are champagne problems. Oh, I'm doing Gypsy, and I also have to be on the set. Actors who are smart enough, we don't complain about, oh gosh, we have to work. No, we're happy. But it requires a lot of energy, and sometimes, because the Gilded Age culls from theater actors. I mean, it can be, and Good Wife and Good Fight were like that too. We had so many actors who were busy, and we had to get them out by 5 for their curtain or whatever. So it was always a logistic nightmare. But then somehow it gets done, and then you have Kelly O'Hara, and you have Audra O'Donnell. You have so.
No, because everybody I've spoken to said there were all these weird schedules, but it all comes together.
I know, and yeah.
So when you get a script for a certain episode, then the costume arrives.
I think the costume designer, I think she gets the script. She's one of the first people to get it, even if it's a very rough draft, because she has to, forget the rewrites. She just has to know, is it outdoors? Is it indoors? Yeah. And she has to coordinate colors and all. So she's one of the first. But, I mean, these clothes take a lot of time and skill to make. So it's not like you go to Bloomingdale's and take this off the rack.
But is it exciting when your costume arrives for a specific scene you're going to do?
God, I mean, look at me. I'm just, the burgundy velvet and the green velvet and the royal blue velvet and the beads and the whole thing. You get swatches of fabric for all your clothes. And I said, I keep the swatches. And at the end of the first season, I took a large vase and I took all my swatches and I made a bouquet. So I have a kind of flower piece of all of my velvet, swatches of different colors. But it's kind of thrilling. And I particularly, I love clothes. I love couture. I so appreciate what the costume department does, because you're talking about just endless detail. And Kasia, our designer, is so brilliant and so exacting that when I get my costume, I'm just so grateful for whoever was involved in creating it, because it certainly contributes about 75% of my character, and then I add a little bitchy attitude, and there you go.
And there you have it. Do you shoot everything out of sequence with everyone's schedules? Like, we have this
room.
A
lot. Yeah. We do a lot. I mean, obviously the first episode was, but still you skip scenes, and it's entirely dependent on, it can be weather, as in if it's outdoors and it's, but logistically who's available, or, in a word, yes. And if you're doing 2 shows at once, like Cynthia and I, both, she did her show and Just Like That and Gilded, and I was doing Good Fight and Gilded. Both shows shot out of sequence because of COVID and people getting COVID, and then schedules would change. I remember at one point looking in my living room, and I like to learn my lines well in advance just because there's so much coming at you. I had scripts from different episodes for 2 shows. And I was like, no wonders I don't get to read novels. And, the people what are you reading? I said, I don't read, I just learn scripts.
Are you good at memorizing?
It's more challenging now. I have to work harder at lines. I cannot believe that when I was in my 20s, I could, some actors can actually learn lines in the chair and then shoot. I can't do that. But it's not just not being able to memorize. I like to live with lines for as long as possible. So I beg for scripts. If nothing else, just give me a rough draft so that I know what the scene is. What is it about? What am I in for in terms of a character? What is going to be my conflict? What should I obsess about? And then if I get a rough draft, it's fine. I won't memorize a rough draft, but just let me have it. Let me have it as soon as I can. And then if you have it and they don't change it and you get to live with it, it's rather like being in the theater where you do work on a script for 4 weeks. A week of previews, 2 weeks of preview. The theater is such a luxury because of the time you have with material, whereas, the real ultimate challenge with TV is it's just a fast-moving train. You shoot a scene and chances are you're not going to do a reshoot unless there's a real problem.
Yeah. Did the scripts for the Gilded Age, do they change a lot?
No.
Good, I think.
No. There can be rewriting, and sometimes the concern is historical accuracy, or we can often make some comments and, massage it a little, but no actor asks for major rewrites, or my character would never do that. No. No.
It's Julian Fellows.
I know. I remember doing a Neil Simon's Rumors, and I went to Gene Saks and I said, this line, I think it could be rewritten or something. And he looked at me like, you don't rewrite. You don't suggest to Neil Simon a rewrite. I think he knows how to do it.
Well, I want to know, you grew up in Buffalo. Where did your love for performing begin? And was your grandmother one of your greatest influences early on?
Well, yes, to my grandmother. She was an actress in the Polish theater. I've said this in so many interviews, but my appreciation for my Nana grows as I get older. I think, oh my God, I shared a bedroom, twin beds, with a woman who was an actress in the Polish theater who wrote a radio comedy hour with her friend. She was a comedy writer because we had Polish radio as well. So I lived with a sort of anti-Mame. She was flamboyant, she was gracious, and she was loving. She loved singing and dancing. And my parents, both parents, were part of a Polish singing group, so I went and saw them perform. But my fondest memory, and I've said it in so many interviews, so forgive me if you've heard the story, but right before my dad died, and I lost him when I was 8, he took me, I had a date with my tatuś. Tatuś means father in Polish. And I was sitting on the aisle and we went to see this Polish singing and dancing group called Śląsk. And it was Polish folk dancing and singing. And my father, well, I grew up in a bilingual household, so he spoke beautiful Polish and he loved Polish culture. But, it was a joyous, colorful singing and dancing. And at the end, the performers, instead of taking a bow, they waved their shawls at the audience. And suddenly I looked up because my father had tears rolling down his cheeks and was shouting, "Bravo, bravo." And I was so embarrassed that my father he was a big guy and he was shouting, and I'd never heard anyone shouting. And I kept saying, "Tatuś, Tatuś." I was embarrassed by his emotion and his display. And to this day, I just think the power of performers, I think I realized the power that performers have over people. Watching my father react like that and his love of performance. So, there you go. You ask for seminal moments for people, what happened, why. That was a really big moment in my life. And then I lost him shortly after that. He dropped dead of an aneurysm. So, but he, obviously, my father and my grandmother had a great influence on me.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, you have one of the most illustrious careers on stage, screen, and TV. So I'd like you do.
Okay.
So this is your life, Christine Baranski.
I know.
So
it just means I've been around a long time.
So I'd like to mention just some of the highlights and just tell me what comes to mind, a fun memory or a wonderful story. You started in the theater. You won your first Tony Award for Best Featured Actress in a Play for your stunning work you mentioned in Tom Stoppard's The Real Thing, opposite Jeremy Irons and Glenn Close, directed by the great Mike Nichols. How magical was that show for you in working with that team? I mean, Jeremy, Glenn, Mike Nichols.
Well, I've always said that was a trip to Paris on the Concorde. It never got any better. It was... We tried out in Boston, and this is before cell phones and texts and internet and, getting the word out immediately. We were in Boston, and we were doing the work on the play. But it was a magical year because I'm going to roll back the tape a little because it's really the beginning of my success. I was cast in Midsummer Night's Dream, directed by James Lapine, and it probably remains my favorite time on the stage, doing Shakespeare under the stars, and it was an enchanting experience. And I won an Obie Award, which was to me like winning the Oscar. I was a theater actress, and I'd won an off-Broadway, distinguished award. So there was that, and then James wanted me to audition for a Sunday in the Park with George for the workshop that was done with Mandy and Bernadette, and I had to sing for Stephen Sondheim, and I got the role of the artist's wife, who's the center figure in the painting. And on the last performance, we only gave a handful of performances, but it was the last performance, and it was the only performance where Steve had written a second act, and we were putting the second act in that night, and that was it. And who was in the audience but a man named Mike Nichols? And I remember leaving the theater and Mike Nichols and Leonard Bernstein were there in one night. And I remember passing him, and he said something nice to me, and I was Mike Nichols. And next thing you know, I was auditioning for that. He clearly was captivated by my performance, and I got a shot at auditioning, and I got the role as Jeremy's wife. And the rest, as they say, is history, because it was a huge, solid gold Broadway hit.
Yeah.
I've never had an experience like that in the theater. It was just, you couldn't get a ticket, and Glenn and Jeremy were just utterly sexy and magnificent, and I had this witty, the wisecracking the wronged wife. I mean, there's nothing funnier than the wife who's been cheated on, and then she's going to get out her one-liners and have that as her weapon. I mean, Charlotte's a wonderful role, but it was a supporting actress. That was fine. Won my Tony and had a baby a few months later. I carried my firstborn on stage for 6 months. But that's because I was really skinny when I started. And also, but by the end I was walking like a crab. I didn't face this way. But I definitely had to get off the stage at that point.
Well, we're going to back up even further,
yes.
because she made her off-Broadway debut and her Broadway debut in the same season. She did a play, Playwrights Horizon, and she did a mystery that I saw that didn't run long at all. It's called Hide and Seek with the wonderful Elizabeth Ashley. And you told me upstairs, what was it like, favorite memory of doing that show with Elizabeth Ashley?
Well, I was so fond of Elizabeth Ashley because when I graduated from Juilliard in 1974, my acting teacher and mentor, who really, really gave me my first serious break, his name is Michael Kahn. He was one of my finest acting teachers, and I didn't even collect my diploma because he'd asked me to be an apprentice at the Shakespeare Theater, American Shakespeare Theater in Stratford, Connecticut. And one of the things I did was I was a lady in waiting in Romeo and Juliet, 12th Night, and I understudied Carol Shelley in 12th Night, and I understudied and Carol Shelley in, no, I didn't understudy her in 12th Night. I understudied Carol Shelley as Lady Capulet in Romeo and Juliet. I didn't understudy anyone in 12th Night, but I understudied the great Elizabeth Ashley in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof.
Yeah.
Now, I think I got to do that because Michael knew that Elizabeth Ashley would have to be half dead, but she was not going to miss a performance. But it was great because I hung out that summer, and she was terrific. She's such a terrific lady, and it was such a great performance. And she kind of took me under her wing, and I remember her, wanting to help get me an agent and all. But years later, not that many years, but years later when I did Hide and Seek, I got, cast in this small role. But Lizzie, Miss Lizzie, I called her, she was so generous that I had a scene like this where I visit. I don't even remember the scene, but it was a thriller. Yeah. And I remember it was my Broadway debut, so I was over the moon excited. But she literally gave the scene to me by doing this. Yeah. She played the scene like this. That means everybody was looking at me. That's very generous. But, I'll always remember her for that.
That's a great story, because I told her Cat's one of my favorite shows with Liz Ashley, but that story that she did was so generous to you, but that's Elizabeth Ashley.
Yeah.
That's great. So you won your second Tony Award for Best Featured Actress in a Play for Neil Simon's farce Rumors, which you mentioned, asking him for a rewrite.
I didn't ask Neil.
You asked Gene.
I asked Gene.
But Gene, and Gene's like, no.
He said, no, don't ask Neil.
But how much fun was that production? I loved that show.
That was challenging.
Yeah.
That was a challenging show. It's not the world's best written farce. And I would say a lot of that performance that I gave was me making up behavior with the cigarette, and and that first act curtain. I mean, that really is one of my favorite things that I've ever invented on the stage. Back when they had telephones with wires, remember? A telephone that had a wire. I'm dating myself, 20th century. I was wearing this short Chanel, it was a Chanel dress, and it was like a pink skirt under black tulle, and it was short, but it kind of bounced, and I had black high heels, and I always thought I looked like a flamingo. But for the first act curtain, everything's going crazy, and I said to Jean, what if I trip over the wire? Because by then my character was already quite tipsy, because she'd been, because of stress, she's been smoking a lot and drinking. Anyway, I chose to trip over the wire and then turn around like this, because I'm trying to get up, but I'm getting up and my skirt is going up, and all the audience sees, I'm not going to do this for camera here, is two legs, and the curtain went down with my legs and the skirt up, and all so it was a great visual. Except one night I forgot to put on my dance briefs. I just had my pantyhose. So Jessica Walter, actually, I told her, I said, I don't have my dance briefs. And she said, I'll take care of you. And as the curtain was coming down, she flipped my skirt open. She had my ass.
Yeah. And she won a Tony Award.
That's how you win a Tony Award.
That's how you win a Tony Award. But, okay, so your first big break on TV, when I think a lot of people really knew you, was playing Marianne Thorpe on the hit TV series Sybil, which won you your Emmy Award. How career-changing was that role? You had mentioned that a little bit. Because we hadn't seen anything like that character on TV yet.
No, and I'd resisted doing television, and I was raising kids with my late husband, Matthew. Yeah. We were raising kids in Connecticut. I did not want to live in LA, and so when television came knocking at my door after the first and second Tony Award, I said, if you do something in New York, I'll consider it. But I was in love with the theater. I was a theater actress. But, as your kids begin to get a little older and you're looking at school tuitions and all, I thought, and then I had done a very big musical called Nick and Nora, which I thought was going to pay a lot of bills for a long time. And it was one of the biggest flops in Broadway history. It previewed for 8 weeks and ran for 1 week. But anyway, that was an extraordinary disappointment. And then I went back to doing Lips Together and did a few other things. But by the time the Carsey Warner Company knocked on my door and said, we have a couple of things we really want you to consider. One was the American version of Absolutely Fabulous. And I thought, oh, okay, well, that could be fun. And then the other project was Sybil Shepherd's Best Friend. Now, the Absolutely Fabulous thing sort of was on hold or something, but this guy named Chuck Lorre, who at the time wasn't the Chuck Lorre he is now, but I was smart and clever enough to read that script and go, well, those are funny lines, and I know how to deliver them. That's I said to my manager, well, if I'm going to make the jump, and I'm still, to this day, I think the night before I left to, have my final meeting with the network, I think I was half thinking, no, I don't want to do it, I don't want to do it. But they practically had to push me onto the plane. And then I did read for the network, and the network at that time didn't want me. Chuck Lorre wanted me, and Carsey Warner, but the head of the network, whose name shall remain nameless, he will remain nameless. He said nobody's interested in Christine Baranski. So he didn't really want me. But then I got cast and won a Emmy after 13 episodes. But that's because that role was so unique. As you say, nobody had seen a a sophisticated martini swilling divorcee who was plotting revenge against her ex-husband. She was fun, she was naughty, she was witty, and they, he and his writing staff wrote, just great. And I, with all the theater experience that I had, I knew how to do that. It came easily to me. So that was a really good choice, and it really launched me in so many ways into not only film, TV, but film. Because after that, it was within the first year after the first full year of Sybil, Mike asked me to be in the Birdcage, and then I did Bowfinger and Bulworth, and my career started moving into film, which it would never have done had I remained a theater actress, because I suddenly a national audience knew who I was. That's the power of television.
Well, let's talk about the Birdcage. Birdcage fans? I watched it again on the plane yesterday, and it's a phenomenal film. Elaine May script, everything. But please tell me about working with the incredible cast. I mean, Robin Williams, Nathan Lane, Hank Azaria, Gene Hackman, Diane Wiest. What was Callista Flockhart? What was that like? Just working and being on the set
whenever
with them?
you work on a Mike Nichols project, you already feel like you're. How can I describe it? I mean, every actor who's ever worked with Mike just says how special it is, and nobody can really articulate why he was so special, but he made you feel so smart and so potentially great, and it was just like a love affair. We were down in South Beach, Miami, and it was fun, and Ann Roth did the costumes, and I didn't, I wasn't part of the, my character was sporadic because, I wasn't on the set every day, but when I was on the set, particularly with Nathan and Robin, it's a well-known fact that Robin would just sort of go off and be doing monologues, and it was just Vesuvial, he was just brilliant, and we'd all just be, doubled over laughing, and this was just between takes. It was like watching the Robin Williams show, and he was a beautiful human. I am, to this day, that's one of my favorite scenes that I've ever done on film, was when he walks in and we see each other after all that time, knowing we'd made a child together, and all those years had passed, and I remember saying to Mike, no, let's not start talking right away. Let's have a moment of recognition, and like just sitting there realizing we both probably were in summer stock back in the days, and the 60s, when everybody was sleeping around and we had too much to drink, and we wound up in bed together, and I got pregnant but didn't raise this child, and he comes to me and says he needs you to be his mother now. And then we relive the moment of like being performers in whatever show we did, singing that marvelous Sondheim song. And I'll just never forget when he lifts me up in his arms, there was like this moment of feeling his physicality and my physicality, that, these two people could have wound up in bed together. And Robin had a very, very masculine presence. He had all that chest hair, and he had and I say this with great affection, he had a very strong, sexy male odor. So it was like there was testosterone in that scene. And so when Nathan walks in and we're kind of having some champagne again, it felt very real. I think I love that scene because it felt very real. Things were happening. Some magic was happening, and to this day, and how we got the lyrics wrong, and then we both corrected the lyrics. It was, it's one of my favorite scenes I've ever done. And look who I did, He got me, when it was my last day on the set, he got me a book of plays. No, he got me the biography of Catherine Cornell, because he said Catherine Cornell was from Buffalo. It was so gracious of him. He had a huge heart. He was such a deep, complex man, but he had just an enormous, like a heart and shoes,
Because it's such a funny, funny movie, and then this scene appears, and it's so poignant. It's
It
just,
is, isn't
yeah,
it? Yeah.
it's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Of the rekindling, and like you said, you
Yeah.
can tell why you got
It's a
together.
short scene, but
Oh, it's beautiful.
it's just, I like it better than the original film. In the original film, I love the original film, the French film, but I never understood that scene because she suddenly was crawling all over him, and I thought, well, how does that? There was no lead up to it. Whereas I think the way we did it, there was a slow unfolding and a reminiscence, and then it got a little sexy, and then it was over. But it was sweet.
Well, then you got to play opposite Warren Beatty in Bulworth. I mean,
No.
working with Warren Beatty, like director and actor. Fun memory from that film, or just being around him?
Warren Beatty. I mean, if you get to be around Warren Beatty, and you're a woman, it's pretty good. And he had seen me in The Real Thing.
Yeah.
And I was already pregnant, but I wasn't so pregnant that I looked pregnant, but I had a peach silk robe on that I came in the second act with a peach silk robe. And by then, when you're pregnant, you start blossoming. Anyway, I think I looked pretty nice in that peach silk robe. And I remember coming to work one night, and they said, do you know Warren Beatty? And I said, no. And he said, he was looking for you. He insisted he wanted to meet you. And I said, really? And he was there with Julie Christie. I thought, oh, okay. So I like that. I wasn't there. I wasn't there when he showed up. I had left the building already. But so he knew my work. And he had seen me, he had seen me in The Real Thing. So he cast me as his wife in Bulworth, which was, another great opportunity to work with a great director. And I was on camera with him, too.
Yeah. Was it great to watch him be an actor and a director?
Well, he was playing that politician who had to do the rapping. And it was so intimidating because he had a ballroom of people. And once he started the rapping, so it was very complicated for him to direct himself and do all this rapping. I remember that took a long time, but he's a great director and a marvelous flirt. And now he's married to the great Annette Bening. So lovely.
You are known to millions of TV fans for playing Diane Lockhart on The Good Wife and The Good Fight. You must have so many wonderful memories of that show and how it's reflective of what we're living through now.
Well, I said, I don't want to be in the sequel to The Good Fight. I mean, we decided, or the Kings decided, they wanted to continue the character of Diane Lockhart, and I was all in because I was, the reason I wanted to continue The Good Wife, so many of us did, was because of the caliber of the writing. You're lucky. I've been so lucky with Julian Fellows, Chuck Lorre, and Robert and Michelle King. I've just worked with the best writers. But there was a pause button, and then I think, I was offered something else by another network. And when the Kings heard that, they stepped up and said, no, we want to continue working with Christine, and we'll come up with an idea. And so, then they titled it The Good Fight, and it really became about living through the first Donald Trump term, Trump derangement syndrome, this liberal feminist who's, the head of a law firm, and having her live her life going crazy, thinking, the guardrails are off. Well, now they're really off, but back then it felt like the show was, if not exactly on schedule in terms of what was happening, it was almost ahead of its time. Because we were playing scenes about what if the guardrails really come off? What if people decide not to show up if they're subpoenaed? What if the rule of law no longer applies? And look what we're living through. So I think when it ended, it needed to end. Yeah. But it's when you look back on that show, not that you would want to watch that show now, because all you have to do is watch MSNBC and you will have had enough. But it will be a chronicle of what life under the first Trump term was. It was as pertinent a show as was written at that time.
What incredible cast members you
Oh
got
my
to
God,
meet.
was another revolving door on
Yeah.
great actors, New York actors, and of course then we lived through COVID as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, just playing judges and lawyers and victims and so many great guest stars.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, New York's just a great place to film.
Yeah. You know, we have a lot of actors here today and watching all around the world. I want to talk to you about auditioning. Were you always good at auditioning? Was there a secret to auditioning for you early on when you had to audition?
You know, I just tried to be as prepared as I could be and have an idea. Come in with an idea. Give them something. And if they wanted to direct me to do it another way, it would do. But make a choice. Make a choice. I would suggest, because I know a lot of actors now feel pressure to be totally off book, as though that's a sign of wanting the role or being well prepared. I say, even if you know the lines, take the book, because it reminds everyone that this is a process. You're not actually there to give a full performance. You're there to give an indication of what you would do. So, and also you put an enormous pressure on yourself as an actor if you go in thinking, what if I forget my lines?
Yeah.
If you have the book, you have the book. So that's a comfort level. I've often said that on the set when we have, we gather on the set for a first reading before we start shooting.
Yeah.
A lot of actors will be off book, and I always think, let's just read the scene, because don't put your focus on whether or not you know the lines, and then you get thrown if you don't know the lines. Just be easy on yourself and read it. The time for getting off book comes much later. But yeah, I've tried to be as prepared as I can, and I think if you possibly can, go in there with as open a spirit as you can have. It communicates. Your humanity communicates when you walk in, which is why I think it's so unfortunate that actors now are auditioning via Zoom, because that's so different from like what we have right now, just our interaction. You're feeling my presence, I'm feeling yours. And, you can win people over. You might not be exactly right for a role, but you walk and they go, wow, she's interesting, or he's interesting, or look at that. There's that sense of humor, or a little bit of talking and interaction before the scene starts. People can fall in love with you, and next thing you know, they're giving you a lot more rope, a lot more leeway to maybe prove yourself. So I think actors we're just so hard on ourselves, and we get in our own way. And if you can just remember, well, I did watch Holland Taylor's marvelous Q&A, and she gave such wonderful advice. If you want to go back, she has done one of these, and she gave such pragmatic advice. But one of the best things she said, and I have to write to her because I know her and I adore her, as she said, nothing in our profession is personal. Nothing. Norman Lear said that to her. It's not personal. If you don't get a role, it's not because they didn't like you. It's something, they were looking for something else, or they already have an offer out. Don't be hard on yourself. And I also think concentration is key in every aspect of the work that we do, cultivating a real sense of concentration, so that when the moment arrives and you have to execute on camera, on stage, in an audition, you are in your zone. Just cultivate concentration and relaxation. I think that's true in life, actually.
Yeah.
Presence. We're talking about presence. The ability to just
Be.
I'm waiting for you to say something, and then I'm going to. But we're alive in the moment.
You know, it's just so hard now with everybody because you listen to some casting directors, oh, you should have more light on, don't look straight ahead, look to the left. I mean, every casting director has a whole different idea
Really?
of what they're, I mean, all the actors know us out here, it's like, you know, it's like you worry so much about getting a self-tape ready that you get lost in what you should be doing, which is just being,
Yes.
you know.
Yeah. Oh, I think young actors have it way harder, and COVID did this thing where, okay, now it's easier to audition and do chemistry readings on Zoom. Okay, I never had to do that, and I would, but you do what you have to do, of course. And then I said this to a friend yesterday who's having to do a Zoom thing, a chemistry read, because she's a director.
Yeah.
And I said, well, maybe let's look at it on the bright side. Maybe the fact that you get to control your own performance and you don't have to walk in a room and you don't have to wait outside with 10 other actors soaking up their anxieties as you sit there and look, oh, she looks like she's more ripe for the role than I am, or she's pretty. You don't have that vibe. And you don't have the vibe of walking in the room and like adrenaline. You don't have that. So maybe like you do your audition on your own terms when you've calmed down and you self-tape, maybe there's a benefit there. Maybe you have more control of your craft. I don't know. I'm just saying, if this is what we have to live with, you may as well, use it and use it to the best of your advantage.
Perfect advice, right? No, because seriously, I know a lot of actors who'll be like, they do like 100 takes, but they're like, and someone's husband will be like, stop doing that. But just do like 4 or 5 of them, and then just pick the best one that you have. Like I said, you have the opportunity of saying, oh, I can fix this a little bit, but don't live in your head when you're doing a Zoom too. Just do 4 or 5 takes, pick the best one, just send it in.
But we hate looking at ourselves. So the problem is, I would never find my best take. I'd still be looking for it. I hate that.
Well, over the years, you've worked with the late, great Stephen Sondheim, playing Mrs. Lovett in Sweeney Todd, for which you won the Helen Hayes Award for Outstanding Actress in a Musical. You played Carlotta in Follies, of course, singing I'm Still Here, the stepmother in the film of Into the Woods. What was it like working with Sondheim and just living in his songs?
I keep coming back to that year of Midsummer Night's Dream that led to Sunday in the Park with George. That's the first time I worked with Stephen Sondheim. No, but it was not the first Sondheim musical I did. I did a production of Company when Playwrights Horizons was in Queens.
Wow.
And he came backstage and he said, that was a wonderfully original take on that role. And well, I went home and I just thought I had died and gone to heaven, that Stephen Sondheim had said something complimentary to me. So then I did Sunday in the Park, and then I did the workshop of Assassins. And then concert versions, I did Little Night Music, I did Carlotta, and then I did Follies, and then I did the Royal Albert Hall. I played Phyllis, the Royal Albert. So I had a lot of, and then of course 2 Sweeneys, one in LA as a concert version, and then a full production at the Kennedy Center, which was thrilling, my maybe second favorite thing I've ever done on the stage, the most exciting thing. And the wonderful thing about, Steve, everybody says so intimidated by Steve, and he's in the room, and oh my God, and Steve was a great collaborator. He cared nothing more than to help you and to be specific, and he'd give notes that were very specific. He wasn't like sitting there going, oh God, he just had this ferocious presence. He had that deep, fabulous voice, but he had an intellect like a laser, and his ability to articulate was, he just was a great communicator. We'll look at his lyrics, but he could be very specific. So over the years, I relaxed as I worked with Steve, and I remember when I had to sing "I'm Still Here" at City Center, I I asked if he would, he came to see Regrets Only, which was a play I did by Paul Rudnick, and I asked if he would have a drink with me afterwards because I was in preparation to do Follies. And I just said, talk to me about the song. And we went line by line by line. What did it mean? And because it's a song about, it's a historical period. And I remember him coming backstage, one of the first performances, and it's so intimidating to sing that song because it's so associated with being a drop-dead showstopper.
Yeah.
And then he did the nicest thing. He came backstage and said, you know, I didn't write that song to be a showstopper. So get that out of your head. You're obliged to just, you know, do Elaine Stritch. Yeah. Just be very specific with all those lyrics, because each lyric is about a different visual, and that's how I approach the song, living through each of those, you know. I've stuffed the dailies in my shoes, strummed ukulele, sung the blues, seen all my dreams. It's about living through the Depression, living through Hollywood. If you have a visceral attachment to each of those lyrics, you can get through that song and not worry about, I'm still here. That is such a bitch of a vowel. Here. Any singer will tell you. Yeah. So I actually once said to Steve, couldn't you have written an O so it's, I'm still whore. That's an open sound. Here is a tight sound. But no, it's not, no, I'm still whore doesn't work.
No, but I've spoken to all these ladies over the years that have sung that because you hear da-da-da, da-da-da, and it just all the verses. But like I said, if you break it down of how it travels from, which is fascinating what you did with him, where the song starts and where it goes to.
And it ends with I'm still here precisely because you've gone through all those different periods. It's like, I thought of my mother, stuffed the dailies in my shoes, you know? Living through all those different eras that, you know, I've lived through it. It's the great showbiz anthem.
Yeah. Bernadette Peters told me when they were doing Follies, someone had asked her, I don't know what I'm doing in this song, and she said, "Don't ask me, ask Steve." But Steve would give you like four words that would just set you on your path. Like she said, he's so succinct.
Yes.
It wasn't like 12 sentences.
Yes.
It was like 5 words. You're like, oh, now I get it.
Yes. Detail meant everything to him. They say genius is in the details. He was all about specificity. He wrote a word, it meant that word was meant to be, and you could ask him about it, and he would know exactly. So you learn from somebody like that. You learn that, and I learned that doing Sweeney, to break it down and break it down and break it down, because Sweeney's Mrs. Lovett is very challenging because you have to sing and talk in a Cockney, and Cockney accents are very difficult anyway. Ask Dick Van Dyke. Although he never tried. I don't think Dick Van Dyke ever tried. No. Which is why now he's famous for doing a terrible Cockney. But and then to sing in a Cockney, you know, there's so much layering. It's a very rangy role. Vocally, sometimes you're almost singing, and I was singing with Stokes Mitchell, so sometimes it was like operatic singing, keeping up with him. Sometimes it was just belting. Sometimes it was, you know, a lot of it is middle voice where you're, what's the matter, dearie? How have you? You got to keep it in that middle range where you're semi-singing and talking. So there's so many details in that role. That's why if you can succeed playing that role, it's just like, yes, it's yummy.
Yeah, you were glorious in that role, just so you know.
I had the best time. I had the best time. Yeah, and Steve was. He was a part of the process. We were all doing different, everybody was in a different rehearsal hall doing a different Sondheim musical and rehearsing, and then we'd go out and drink. My favorite story of turning 50, I turned 50 the day Steve Sondheim came to see the first run through of Sweeney Todd. And that's, you know, everybody's scared stiff when Steve shows up and we did the run through. It happened to be my 50th birthday, and Stokes and a bunch of other actors said, we're taking you out to Legal Seafood in Washington, D.C. And who shows up after dinner, because he was giving notes to Chris Ashley, he said, I never miss a 50. And Steve sat down with all of us, and we must have had round after round of white wine as Steve talked about West Side Story and Gypsy. He talked about Robbins and Burns. I was like, who turns 50 and gets this?
Yeah, a master
And
class.
then we just walked home arm in arm on a beautiful spring night. I mean, I have like really loving memories of Steve Sondheim. I feel I'm so blessed to have worked with Sondheim, Nichols, and Tom Stoppard. Three of the seriously great people.
But then your Mame was incredible. She got to do Mame, the Jerry Herman musical. How wonderful was she to play?
She's wonderful. Well, I did Mame as my senior class project in Buffalo. So after I did Sweeney, the Kennedy Center asked me if I wanted to do anything, and I said, God, I'd love to play Mame. And so when they did a full production, and we're talking, the reason the Kennedy Center, at least at that time, was so special was because they had the money to have a full orchestra for Sweeney and for Mame, and to hear those scores with a full brass section for Mame or for Sweeney, was just thrilling. I'd stand backstage for both musical. Well, no, with Mame you don't stand backstage. You're throwing your clothes off and just getting it back on. But with Sweeney, but Mame, I had a full wardrobe. I had the staircase. I had everything. The one thing they didn't give me was enough time to preview the show. So I didn't even get a week of previews. And with Mame, when you're not on stage, you're literally throwing your clothes off. They're putting your next glamorous outfit on, and you're back on stage. It's considered right up there with Gypsy as one of like a real workhorse role. And we had sets and moving parts, and our first public performance, they came backstage and said, Christine, the hydraulics for the staircase doesn't work, so you have to pretend you're going up and down a staircase. That was my first paid performance at Mame. Yeah. Imagine making your entrance in Mame, just walking out.
With the bugle.
Anyway, they really didn't. They invited the Times and the Washington Post and everything, and I didn't even have a full week of previews, and that really rankled me, because I thought, but you need to give performers time. Yeah. In the past, you do a musical. Angela Lansbury went to 2 different cities before she opened on. And musicals used to, and now everything, the process is fast forward, we don't want to lose money. The reason they gave me was we wanted to just get the reviews out and have people come as soon as possible, because, it's a limited run. I said, well, you've cheated me of the process. I needed the process because I was still working just to integrate costume changes and then being back out there. But that was the sad thing about Mame. But then I continued working, and by the end, hey, I got to play Mame. Yeah. And I worked my way into it to a place where I was very happy with the performance. Yeah.
Well, you should be, because everybody who went down to the Kennedy Center said it was the most phenomenal Mame. And I think the only reason why it didn't come into New York is a budget reason. That's it. They were,
you can't. It's like the Gilded Age. You don't do Mame on the cheap.
You can't.
If you're going to do Mame, you need fabulous sets. You need all those adoring boys, and you need a staircase, and you need that orchestra. So don't even do it. Don't do it on the cheap. Yeah. So there you go.
Well, I'm glad you got to do Mame
I'm glad I got it out of my system. Yeah.
Fabulous. Well, 9 Perfect Strangers. Fabulous. I mean, so the season 3 got picked up at Gilded Age, and you got 9 Perfect Strangers sort of at the same time?
Let's see. I got 9. Oh, gosh, it was the actors' strike. I was offered 9 Perfect Strangers a day before the actors' strike. I said, Nicole Kidman and all these other actors were being offered the role, and it shoots in Europe, in the Austrian Alps. And I said, okay, I'm in. I didn't read a script. And then the next day was the actors' strike, so nobody was talking.
Yeah.
You couldn't talk. You couldn't ask for a script. You couldn't make a deal. Nothing. We had to wait till after. And then after the actors' strike, it was full speed ahead. And I was in Munich for 6 months. And also we did film up in the Alps. That was beautiful.
Yeah.
And then, let's see. Yeah, I finished. Did I finish 9 Perfect Strangers? And then a couple weeks later went into Gilded Age. So that was last year, the Gilded Age, and then the Gilded Age ended in January of this year. Right, okay. It's hard to keep track.
You love 9 Perfect Strangers too, right? Look at the cast you got to perform with. And King Princess?
King Princess, she's now a bud of mine. I love it. She's the coolest, smartest, most gifted young woman. I adore her.
It's a great show.
Is it? I've only seen one.
You're fabulous in the show. Again, you were known to millions of worldwide fans for playing Tanya in Mamma Mia and Mamma Mia 2. I mean, look where you filmed those movies. I mean, it just looked like you were having the time of your life, all of you.
We did. We had too much fun, as I say. It was, the first one was great, but the second one was fabulous. We shot in Croatia on an island called Vis, which hadn't been spoiled by tourism because it was used during the war. Marshal Tito had a bunker there or something. It was used during the Cold War, but the fact is, it was an enchanting island. So what you see is, on camera is pretty much the beauty of this island, which I hope it hasn't been spoiled by tourism because of the popularity of Mamma Mia. But that was Croatia, and in Mamma Mia 1 was 2 different Greek islands. But you have Pierce Brosnan and Colin Firth, and you're singing and dancing, and when you're not, filming, you're eating in some Greek taverna, and we're all hanging out, and that's why when they say Mamma Mia 3, I say, yeah, I could do that. I can do that.
There's a little talk about Mamma Mia 3, isn't there?
I know that Judy Kramer, who's the producer, I think she really wants to do it, and there's a lot of moving parts, so I never want to be quoted as saying there will be because it goes viral.
Oh, yeah.
It will spread from this room all over the world in like
Christine
20
Baranski
minutes.
said it's starting.
Yeah, so I can't say that, but I know there's hope for it.
Yeah.
We just have to. We can't shoot it too far in the future. We'll be, using walkers and canes and things. It's hard to sing Dancing Queen with a walker.
It just looked like you were just all of you having the time of your life. What a beautiful.
I remember saying to Meryl, I said, this is kind of so, it's so odd to do this. It's such a funny thing. But if we look like we're having a blast, the audience is going to have a blast. Yeah. And that's what people say, that it looks like we're all having so much fun, and we are. It's great.
I love those movies. Mamma Mia fans, they're just so beautiful, and we need it now more than anything, so we'll just put it out there, hopefully, for Mamma Mia 3. We'll just put it out there.
We do need some really good entertainment.
Well, you co-starred opposite Jim Carrey in director Ron Howard's How the Grinch Stole Christmas. That had to have been fun, living in that world.
Yeah, ask Jim Carrey. Jim Carrey trained with a Navy SEAL, so he could learn endurance techniques because he was covered from head to toe. Even his fingernails were, that whole whatever that green stuff was. His eyes were covered with green contact lenses, his teeth, every part of him. And I have such respect for him as a performer because he was often acting with a child actor or a dog or by himself. And when he was with all of us, he has a huge, just extraordinary presence and energy. And it had to, every single scene he was in had to be that. The reason I paused is because we did have to, spend hours in the makeup chair doing prosthetic. I didn't have to do as much because I have a who knows. But I had to do a little bit, and then the hair and all, and then the costumes. But Ron Howard wanted to hire people who would be comfortable in that larger than life. So he knew I'd had Juilliard training, and was that I was a physical actor, and that's what he said he needed, someone who could just embody this large. So I'm so grateful I was in that movie, because that was what you call a big Hollywood movie. And it's great if at least once in your career you're in to see what goes into the making. We used every soundstage on Universal. Yeah. We created that whole world of the Who. Everything was created by, and so you entered this state of Christmas enchantment. And and then working with Carrie, of course. I've worked with some great male comedians, if you think about it. I mean, Robin and Jim Carrey and Warren Beatty and Gene Hackman, and I even worked with Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon in Odd Couple 2. It was not a great movie, but Gene Smart, the great Gene Smart, and I played these biker chicks. And we got to, I think I danced with Walter. Walter was my guy, and Jack was Gene's guy. And we got to hang out on the set with Walter and Jack. And guess who visited the set one day? Sophia Loren. I still have a picture, and I've yet to find it, in my memorabilia of Gene and I, Walter, Jack, and Sophia Loren, who she had a crush on Walter Matthau. Yeah.
Because didn't she do Grumpy Men too? Grumpy Old Men
Yes,
too?
and she used to cook pasta for him, and I'll go figure. But so I've worked with some great, great guys.
But I mean, to be on the set with Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon, Some Like It Hot, all the, the Odd Couple,
I know.
all these.
No. Just those were two truly great guys. And I'll tell you something about Jack Lemmon.
Yeah.
He was always the first one on the set. That was his professional ethic. I would try to beat him on the set.
Yeah.
And he was the star. Now, like when you're number one on the call sheet, usually you can, the first AD will call you on set last. Yeah. Nobody waits for, number one doesn't wait.
Yeah.
But he would be the first one there. He was the most professional actor. And I learned something from him, which is if you're number one, which I was finally on The Good Fight, I would say to my first AD, look, don't wait till everyone's on the set. Let me know when camera's ready. I want to be first on the set. Because if number one is on the set, everybody else should be on the set. Yeah. Right? So you set the tone. And Walter and Jack actually, you're going to make Jack Lemmon wait? I don't think so. Yeah. He was there. He was ready to go. He was always he'd call it magic time. Yeah. When cameras are about to roll, he'd say, magic time.
I had Jeff Daniels here, and he said the same thing. There's a difference between, movie stars are movie stars for a reason, because I think it was someone told Jeff Daniels that he said, if you set up these multi-million-dollar shots, like when the sun's going to go down, that golden hour where you have 11 minutes or whatever it is. Yes. Jack Nicholson told him, he said, this is why I'm a film star. Not to be obnoxious, but he said, when you said we have to shoot this now, they've set up this $1 million shot, you've got to be able to stand there and deliver that shot.
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, Mamma Mia, or Does Your Mother Know? We had rehearsed the dancing in London months before we shot that, and I said to Phillida Lloyd, the director, I said, make sure I have enough time once we get to Greece to review the dance. Yeah. Well, what do you think happened? They flew the dancers in the night before, and halfway into the day, Phillida said, you know what, we're going to go on the beach because the light is right, because we did it as the sun, but we had to get the dance in before sunset, but the light was right, and so often you're at the mercy of the light, or your cinematographer says we got to go, and so that we did not have a lot of review work, and I remember being quite grumpy that once again I didn't have my process time, but it was like, here we go, boys, we're all just going to be dancing, and the sun was directly in our eyes, and the poor boys were just dancing on what that was it was a beach, but it was really concrete with sand covering the concrete. So they had a dance floor, but it was concrete, and they were,
It doesn't give.
you know, dancing on, you know, kneeling on concrete and sand. So it was really, really challenging. But to your point, when they're ready, you should be ready.
Yeah.
There's that line in Hamlet, the readiness is all.
Yeah.
And as a performer, gotta be ready.
But see, that's the brilliant moments. Like you said, you're training at Juilliard and everything else of being at the top of your game, saying, I gotta go, we gotta go.
Well, that's why I think it helps to be as prepared as
Yeah.
you possibly can be. Michael Caine says that in his book about acting. He sets up everything he might do, like I might be having coffee with you, and I'm going to choose, when I'm at home, I'm going to choose the moments when, so that he would be as prepared as possible because you never know what will be required of you. So if you can be in command of your lines, in command of your character, even in command of your props, and you're already ahead of the game. And then if they do have to change things around, you're ready. Or if they, you know, you're in command of your own stuff. You've done the best you can. And there'll always be variables when you're filming. And sometimes the variables are like, oh, I got to shoot this big dance number now.
Yeah. Because Debbie Reynolds told me when she was working on Mother with Albert Brooks, she arrived a week earlier on the set of The Kitchen, that she knew where the cheese was in the freezer. She knew everything she was going to do. She knew this kitchen inside out. So when she would do the scene, if you go back and watch this scene, she would cut the cheese, she'd take it out of the freezer. She knew that kitchen inside out.
And then she wasn't thinking about it.
No, it was
you
all
have
like...
to do things where you're not because then you can get in your own way. But you're thinking about props. No.
Now, I understand that a role that you're recognized around the world for is Beverly from The Big Bang Theory. But you can go to Europe and people know Beverly, right?
I could go to Beijing, China. No, really. Let me just do this, because you'll know. If I do this with my hair, and I have hair clips, Beverly Hofstadter. And I swear I get stopped. And it in the United States, but it amazes me that in Europe, in Germany, I'm in an exclusive perfume shop next to the most expensive hotel in Munich, and I'm just sampling fragrances, and this very sophisticated man is helping me out, and he goes, oh, Beverly Hofstadter. It's his favorite show. And he said, that's the #1 comedy show in Germany. And like, so Germany, France, England, it is as I said, television is so ubiquitous, and that is a mega hit all over the world, like Mamma Mia. Yeah.
So now when you travel to Europe, someone recognizes you from something.
Yep.
I love it.
Champagne problems.
That's a really good champagne problem. Do you have a favorite memory of filming Addams Family Values? What a fabulous movie. Yeah.
I have a memory of just doing that Thanksgiving pageant, which honestly is, God bless, Paul Rudnick, and so politically incorrect. I mean, but you've got to rewatch it. Just YouTube the Thanksgiving pageant, because it's so funny.
Yeah. You always return to the theater when you can. Does it rejuvenate your craft? Tell me why you always return to the theater.
Well, I haven't returned to the theater. The last Broadway show I did was with the great Mark Rylance. I did 9 months of Boeing, which was a great experience. But although I haven't done a full production, I've done concert versions and things. But here's the thing about the theater. It allows you time, although these concert versions do not allow you time. That's a fast-moving train, too. But I so love process. Yeah. I love, just layering the role. Just today I'm going to work on this aspect of the role, or this, or that, and things come to you, and you just have the time, the luxury of time. And I think you need time to do anything great. The wonderful thing about having played Diane Lockhart for all those years is actually it was 13 years of the same character. So even though TV is a fast-moving train, I got used to how to do it, and because the character became more and more, integrated into who I was, and it became more like theater.
Yeah.
But I would go back to the theater just for the pleasure of having the process and seeing what I could come up with if I did have time, how much richer the work would be if I had time.
Yeah. Because I always ask actors who do film and TV, they're like, I like to return because the train starts and the arc goes like this, there's and it's all in sequence.
Yes, and you're not shooting, you're living it in sequence. Plus, you're living your craft in front of a live audience, which I think is going to be more and more important in this crazy world of technology and AI and screens and all. The art of the living human being, whether it's dance, singing, opera, theater, even sports, watching human beings in the present moment, human beings witnessing other human beings, is invaluable. We have to value our human life, our human interaction.
Yeah. I'd love for you to touch on the longevity of your career and the variety of all the different genres you continue to work in. Like, you have this kind of career. I don't know if people can have a career like this today, because you started, I always say in hearsay, can you look back, could you have the kind of career you started out in? But when I look at your career, how you started and where you went to, and,
I know, it's just such a privileged, marvelous trajectory that I had. My first play was an avant-garde play called The Master. I was still in high school.
Yeah.
I was with an avant-garde theater, a company called the Company of Man. It was a 2-character play called The Master. It was an anti-war play, anti-war meaning Vietnam. I wore an American flag as a mini dress with white go-go boots. I remember that. So that's 68. That was 1968, was my first play. And then, high school plays, but then my Juilliard years, and then all those years of theater. I didn't go to television until I was 42. And given how much television I've done, it's amazing that I didn't start. I didn't go to Hollywood until my 40s, which is why I always want to tell actors, young actors, this story, because, I think there's such pressure now to use your youth as a commodity, and agents will tell you can't go out of. I went out of town for years. I was doing regional theater, playing great roles and having a ball. I lived paycheck to paycheck, but now I don't know if young actors would use up that decade in their 20s to largely go unseen, but to learn how to do it. But I learned how to do it by just doing it over again. But not to be discovered at age 42 in a sitcom called Sybil. That's pretty unusual, but it can be done. It can be done. And then by the time I arrived, I was ready because I was a trained theater actor, so I could just do those one-liners and go home.
Everybody has their own path. Everybody's path is different, right? And just remember that, right?
I know. I was watching Helen Mirren speak in one of these. I was astonished to hear her say early in the interview that she had no formal training. Yeah. And then she learned about film acting just by doing it and by working with Harrison Ford and watching what he did and learn. There's all kinds of ways into the business. There's all kinds of ways into. I wouldn't want to tell people there's one way of acting or you've got to do this or that. I was well trained, but I was watching Holland's interview. Yeah. She reminded me to go back to read the Stella Adler books on acting because she was a great teacher. So I like to reread acting books about craft and just remind myself of this. They said Nureyev, he was an old guy, crippled practically, but he went to the ballet bar every day and did pliés. Well, actors have to do that. We have to remind ourselves, simple, talking, listening. The basic skills still are have to remind ourselves.
Well, I want to thank you for spending the afternoon with me.
And thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Christine Baranski.
you.